want to say?
Hello, security peeps. We are live on the Breaking Into Cybersecurity podcast series. I am Renee Small. We are in hoodie land today. I am here with my awesome co-host, Chris Foulon. Say hi to everybody, Chris.
Hey, everyone.
And the wonderful Kirsten Renner. Say hi to everyone, Kirsten.
Hello.
Hi. So Kirsten is the head of recruiting, senior director of recruiting at Novetta. And we have Kirsten on today and Chris on today to talk about all kinds of fun stuff. As you all know, we initially started out with talking about how Kirsten got into this wacky world of cybersecurity. As a recruiter like me out here trying to recruit you folks into the field. So first she's going to talk about that. And then we'll also start talking about allies, since I know Chris is on an ally panel in RSA this week. Kirsten, are you in RSA this week as well?
I am not, sadly.
Okay, so Kirsten and I will be out here recruiting on the East Coast while you all are having fun in RSA, but we'll still talk about allies and how we can continue to support each other in this industry. So Kirsten, can you get started by telling us about how you got into recruiting folks like Chris into the industry?
Sure. I started in I was an admin, and then I started in an internship in development. I liked it. I was very interested in it. I wasn't very good at it, but I wanted to stay with technology. I'm a college dropout, by the way, so I didn't really have a path, and I was in IT, standing up help desks for a while. And the part of that I enjoyed the most was the building the teams. And that's how I got into recruiting. And once I started, I was like, this is it. I can be involved with technology. I can be surrounded by people doing the cool stuff and not have to do the cool stuff myself. So, and it's really cool. What is also really cool about recruiting is, and this will be a really good transition into the ally part of our conversation, is my favorite part. My favorite part is the conferences. It's being a volunteer. It's helping with the villages, doing those sorts of things. It's relationship stuff. And so in a way, you're also a hacker, because you have to be constantly reverse engineering everything that somebody needs. I have to build requirements around every relationship, right? And then I have to walk it back from the finish line and make it work. So that's how I hack. I'm done with the hoodie.
Super cool. Me too. It's kind of hot under there.
Right? Yeah.
So Kirsten, I always say to people that I love recruiting because every job is like a mini project. So by you saying that, hacking, like reverse engineering the whole process of, hey, what do you need? And then backing into that, I feel the same exact way when it comes to recruiting. So how did you get into, did you start in the cybersecurity space, or did you start in some other world of recruiting and then eventually got into cyber?
I started with IT, and I saw a tweet this morning, and forgive me, I can't remember who tweeted it, but it said something along the lines of, cybersecurity isn't IT, but you can't cybersecurity without starting there, without knowing it, without understanding it. And coincidentally, that's where I started. Like literally, I'm so old. I was standing up at the first help desk with the first PCs at a local municipality. Like we went from AS400 to PCs, and that's how I started. And how did I get into cybersecurity? I was on a GovSec contract, and again, I started with the IT side of it initially, and then I did telecommunications, and then there was a cyber component to all of those things. And super fast story, I walked into one of my hiring manager's offices at an integrator years ago. Holy crap, it was like 12 years ago. And I was looking at all the books on his shelf, and I was trying to understand. I didn't have to do any of the hard recs like security researcher or anything like that, but I wanted to. So I pulled some books off the shelf, and I was like, can I borrow these books? And he was so blown away that I was interested to actually learn the technologies that I was on a plane to DEF CON 2 weeks later. And
Nice.
now I do 25 conferences a year. So.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I have a similar IT to cybersecurity background, so I relate to that. But the other thing I wanted to highlight that you mentioned is that you had no path. And lots of people come into security like that as well. And then, as Renee and I mentioned, there's a whole ecosystem around cybersecurity that you don't necessarily need to be doing the technical stuff. There's a lot of feeder paths into it, recruiting, sales, etc., that you don't have to be a technical person to do it.
That's right. And there's so many important components. My testing is not a good example. That's technical, but the writing and the compliance piece and the policy piece are so integral to making anything work in security. And people don't seem to understand that, or they don't remember that those people that aren't technical, they fully understand the technologies and they're not hitting the keyboard all day long, but they're just as important to the whole life cycle of cybersecurity.
Yeah, we usually equate it, or I do, to the healthcare industry. Everyone doesn't have to be a surgeon or a dentist. There's so many pieces to the puzzle of being in the industry. And by being in cybersecurity in the industry, we all can bring our different talents to the table and be able to utilize them the way you did. So that is pretty awesome. So we're going to get into our allies discussion.
Let's do it.
Let's get into allies. So Chris and Kirsten were having a discussion around supporting each other in the cybersecurity space and in the industry and some of the things that we've seen out there. So Chris is going to be talking on a panel this next week at RSA, supporting allies. So Chris, talk to us a little bit about that panel to get us started to have this discussion around supporting each other in the industry.
Well, I mean, someone nominated me for this award, and I wasn't a finalist, but I was nominated simply for what I do, help promote diversity of thought and everyone and inclusivity into this industry. So man, woman, black, white, whatever sexual relation, we all have a part in this industry. So it's just being supportive of everyone that's interested in this industry and welcoming them and helping them find their place, their path, their journey, and helping them along the way. And so that's what the conversation is about. What can we do to invite people to the industry, support them while they're here, and help them be accepted, as well as those that might be causing hardships for them, supporting them from supporting those coming in and defending against those that might be attacking them because they're part of the old group or the old culture.
Yeah. I had heard, I think on a couple
just a heads up
ago. Yes.
I was just going to say, we might be about to have a teenager might be about to interrupt us. I hear my garage door. So, just in case.
It's always fun on a live podcast. Yeah, I've had mine walking back here. If I open this door, you're going to have 2-year-olds and all kinds of stuff going on. So there it is. But Chris and we talked about, I think we were on a podcast a couple weeks ago, where someone talked about putting up, I remember who it is, but I can't remember his name right now. But Cecil was on with us and talked about going out into on the internet and really doing searches around people trying to break into the industry in particular, and how he had seen some people, not all, but some folks be so arrogant about a person who just didn't know anything. And they were just interested and said, hey, how do I get into this? And he said, like, what he read was kind of appalling. Like, the response to this person asking, how do I break in, was, well, if you have to ask that, then you shouldn't be here, or something to that effect. And that was purely online. And it was just like, he said that he was so appalled by that it made him kind of put stuff out there from a hiring manager perspective, or one of the reasons why he did it. So we're seeing this, we're seeing it online, we're seeing it for people who are new, we're seeing it for people who are, not the typical old guard of what security used to be. So Kirsten, talk to us about your experiences.
Coincidentally, the video I put up this morning, it's 2 minutes. It's just 3 things that can make you a better interviewer. And one of those things was, I promised everyone that if you're talking to someone you want to hire, someone else also wants to hire them. So how are you going to make them come back to you? How are you going to stand out against all the other interviews and all the other offers that they've got going on? And one of the things that I said was, there are it's a 2-part factor that will qualify every candidate for every job. And you're thinking, what in the world could that magic sauce? The magic sauce is, are they willing and able to do it or to learn? That's it. That's the whole thing. If that candidate wants to learn and is able to learn, then they're qualified for all the jobs. And then I think the examples I used were, everybody doesn't know Elasticsearch. Everybody doesn't know Metasploit, right? And I'm picking things out of the air that not a lot of people know how to do. But all the people that do know how to do it had to get there, right? Someone had to teach them. A lot of that shit isn't taught in schools even, right? It's not in a textbook. It's not in the college curriculum. So someone has to make an investment in people that have that magic ingredient, that they're willing and they're able to learn. And so that's how you're going to break in. Somebody's going to have to invest in you. Somebody's going to have to be willing to do that. Everybody doesn't have the budget or the bandwidth necessarily to train large hosts of people. However, the way to break in is to find somebody willing to help you. And I know that a lot of, we're surrounded by engineers. Chris is an engineer. They want there to be a specific formula you can always follow. And it's going to have to be being decent, being an ally. And frankly, statistically speaking, when I'm trying to have a more diverse workforce, when I'm looking around the room and everybody's a man or everybody's white, for example, it's just statistically what's happening, right? So how do we find the people who either aren't raising their hand or aren't getting the opportunities? We have to look around the room, and I'm going to put a little bit more onus on people that have less challenges, right? And say, what can I do to help you get there? Because it's just a habit. For example, I'll just say, whether it's a race or gender or sexual identity, things like this, when you have those barriers against you, it just comes natural to you to always try to earn your spot in the room, right? So I'm going to sit down. It's just my natural habit. And I'm just pretending I'm the example. And I'm going to justify my opinion. And let's just say there's 3 white guys in the room, because statistically there probably are. They are not going to have to justify that they're qualified to have an opinion. And so how could, Chris, you can be my pretend white guy in the room. You can help me.
He's not really white. He grew up in the Caribbean.
It's true.
Y'all didn't know that about Chris, did you?
I hear it, but he's not really white. But the allies in the room can be the ones that are supportive, right? I gotta say, Jason Street is a really, really good example of someone that is a warrior for justice, right? He's someone who is going to see someone else trying to fight against gatekeepers. I'm not going to name the other person who at one point responded to something I had going on in the car hacking village and literally said, "How are you even qualified to talk about car hacking?" is what they said to me.
Wow.
Do you hack cars? And I'm like, wow. And before I had a chance to try to figure out even how to articulate my answer, Jason jumped in. He didn't have to, but he's got tens of thousands of followers, and it mattered. It mattered more to the community that somebody with a checkmark voice said she's allowed to have an opinion. Those are just little things like that in our community that matter.
There's a lot of great chatter on here. Ron
Oh, shit,
said,
I can't do the chatter.
I know, but I'm going to read it to you. So
God.
it's so funny. Ron said, Chris is a pretend white guy. Yes, he is. So Jeff says, if you could discuss how recruiters and those writing job descriptions can help to invite those talented professionals willing and able to learn, join the industry, even through feeder pass. A welcome and thank you for discussion in advance. Kirsten, you want to take that on? Because I can.
I'm also interested in hearing your opinion, because it's not a simple answer. It's going to take more than the job description. I wish that the recruiters sometimes were the ones responsible for writing the job descriptions. They at the very least are the ones that are responsible for sort of interpreting it, if you will, or communicating it out. There's what the customer requirements are. There's what we have to do from a compliance perspective. Most descriptions are horrible. How can I invite you? I can invite you by taking the description and making it barely part of the conversation, right? It's there, it's posted the way it's posted for a reason. I, as the recruiter, or anyone on my team of recruiters, is going to have to better communicate who we're looking for by finding that audience, right? Finding the right paths to reach that audience and drawing messaging around it. For example, if somebody writes a tweet and you want to capture something from it, how do you do it? You retweet it and you take pieces out of it, or an article or something like that. It's kind of like that. And then it's also a very, very key component to this, beyond the description, is the relationship with the hiring manager. It is going to be important. One of the most important things that the recruiter can do, they are representing both sides of the spectrum here, right? So they are your representative, you're the candidate, consider them your agent. If they're doing their job well, they're caring about you, finding out what you need, what you want, what you're willing to do beyond your resume. Most of the resumes suck. Most of the job descriptions suck. So the recruiter is the person in between, having real conversations with the candidate and interpreting the difference between these two horrible documents.
And then one of the other things that was mentioned a while ago that I absolutely love, someone at DEF CON was talking about, we can't get diverse candidates. And then the person responded, well, have you ever walked over to Diana Initiative to look for people over there? And you're like, never thought of that. And it's that same thing. If you go to the same spot all the time looking for candidates, you're not going to have that diversity of thought. So think outside the box, go to different events, go to different locations, post your job listing in different locations, in different ways, change the wording, things like that. And you will have a totally different response than if you use the same canned post all the time.
Yeah. Well, Kirsten knows this too. One, a lot of top people don't even respond to job postings because you all are already working. So we have to go actually find you. So the job posting is one component of all of this. And two, Kirsten, you made so many great points. One, in regards to having a relationship with the hiring manager and recruiters as a whole, because people tend to blame recruiters in this a lot. And there are some of us in the industry that it's definitely, taken and received, but a lot of the times people don't fully understand the whole entire recruitment process and how this stuff works. And in the vast majorities of roles that I have, that in companies, large companies where I've been, recruiters tend to be, there are consultative recruiters, but they tend to be order takers, especially ones that are brand new to the industry and don't fully understand what cybersecurity is. So a hiring manager gives a recruiter a job description. Recruiters typically do not create job descriptions from scratch. Like Kirsten said, if we were creating the job descriptions, that would be a whole different, they would all be beautiful and pretty, hopefully, pretty out there. because that's our area of expertise. The technical person or the cybersecurity leader is not, their expertise typically is not creating job descriptions. So you get some of these wacky job descriptions. The way we are trying to, and I'm saying we as recruitment in the industry, so the recruitment industry as a whole, if you don't have specific cybersecurity knowledge, you're trying to narrow something down. So you see somebody comes in and they say they're looking for quote unquote entry level. It takes a certain type of recruiter to push back, which goes to that relationship part to say, is this truly entry level if you're asking for 5 to 10 years experience? What type of 5 to 10 years of experience are you looking for? Some of these tools have not even been around for 5 to 10 years. Like those types of pushback questions that you have to give, but that comes from trust, having the confidence as a recruiter and all that. 'Cause that question comes up time and time again around recruiting. I'm going to jump into some of these other ones. Ron asked again, how do we work with HR and hiring managers to look at qualified people who may not have direct cybersecurity experience? And Chris and I talk about that all the time. We talk about diversity of thought. We talk about so many different things. But Kirsten, do you want to take that one? Working with HR? So Ron Werner wants to know, how do we work with HR and hiring managers to look at qualified people who may not have direct cybersecurity experience?
Let me preface to say that that my answer, first of all, this is nothing against HR, right? HR does what they do. Typically, recruiting falls under HR. However, my team does not, because in my opinion, and my company thankfully agrees with me, this is not an HR function. When I transition the candidate onto being an employee, they become the human resource and they become HR's problem or issue, right? Their responsibility, rather. So before you are an employee, you're not a human resource. You are a candidate, and that falls under operations. So this is going to improve the relationship that my team has with the customer, who is the hiring managers, who are the technical people. We are part of operations, and that's where recruiting should be. So I just gave some secret sauce to all my competitors. You should put your recruiters under operations. That's where they belong. So how are you going to work with the recruiting team? Are you trying to make the process better, or how are you going to make them look at candidates that aren't? I'm facing this challenge right now, actually, in a specific situation where we're seeing, and Renee, you can attest to this, the pool right now of people actively looking for a job, people that actually have their resumes posted, it is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Mm-hmm. The people who are qualified, I'm almost concerned when there's a qualified application. Like, why are you looking? Right. So it's really more that, and I'm not saying there's not a lot of exceptions to that, but what I'm saying is it's important for the recruiters to be communicating, to say, here's the junior pool, here's the people that are qualified, here's the people that are willing and able, like we said, to learn. Will you take a look at them? Will you give them a chance?
Yep.
It's about communication, and it's about relationships.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I was working on a project last year, and it was such a struggle to find people to fill certain positions. And we kept going back to the managers, and I kept providing them. This is the kind of struggles, some of the things to get a glimpse into a recruiter's world, some of the things that we had to keep going back to the management team, because the management team was looking for a specific type of skill set and specific tools in the industry and all that. And it was just pretty difficult to find the skill set for the price that they wanted to pay, which is another conversation. So we kept saying to them, hey, this is what the market is bearing. This is what this is what your competitors are paying. This is all this stuff. And it was just it just kept going back to, hey, why don't you get some junior people? Hey, why don't you get some junior people? Asking over and over again, because the senior people are out of your range. And I made a comment on a LinkedIn post a couple of weeks ago that said, some folks want champagne, they have champagne taste and they have ginger ale budgets. Like, they want all this stuff. It's not out there. And when you do find it, it's super expensive. And bringing up, back to bringing in more people that don't have that exact experience is key. So another comment, Chris Wolski, my buddy, says, Kirsten, how about we just take race and gender out of this altogether? There's a backlash of being overly supportive to the point of ignoring those that are qualified to do the job, but are white male.
I've 100% in 20 years never seen that occur. I have never seen a job not get filled with a qualified person because we were waiting to give the position to someone that met a diversity checkbox. I'm not saying it doesn't occur. I've never seen it. I've never seen it in the federal government. I've never seen it on a federal contract. I've never seen it in GovSec or InfoSec or IT. I haven't. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I think that there is a misperception that people who are qualified are overlooked because we're so busy trying to find someone that meets one of these protected factors that we've discussed. I assure you that if I find someone that can fill the job, I'm not going to not pursue that person because they're not Black or they're not female or they're not some other fill in the blank. That will never happen. I need to fill the jobs, and I will. So I'm not, and no one on my team and no recruiters that I know are overlooking qualified people. The conversation we're having is more about helping people that are facing challenges, right? My job is to fill the jobs, and I do. And statistically, I don't care what your race or your gender, I don't care about any of that. I wish it was invisible. But please understand that nobody that I know trying to fill jobs is going to overlook someone qualified and willing to do it because they don't check a box. This conversation is more about, can I create an environment? Can I participate in an environment, no matter what it is? Let's stop talking about recruiting altogether. Okay, forget recruiting. If I'm standing at a booth at an event, how can I make the experience better? How can I make it more welcoming? Just for the community at large, just for the people that are walking around, whoever they are, whatever their age, whatever their white, Black, I don't care. I want the environment in InfoSec, in our community, to be more welcoming. And you know what? I think one of the examples in my notes was, I know somebody recently said that examples of men being mistreated by women is so anecdotal that it's not worth saying. However, one of the reasons that Chris and I started talking about this was because of something that I recently saw, where a man was being mistreated by a woman, and I caught myself being complacent, like not sticking up for him, where naturally would have if the situation were reversed. So that the whole reason this conversation started was because I was reflecting on how I wasn't pleased with how I behaved in that situation. I should have said something. I should have said, that's a human being and it's not okay. So this is about all people being treated well.
Yeah.
And that's a true story, right, Chris? I mean,
Yeah.
that just happened.
No,
Go ahead, Chris.
I think another aspect of it, rather than like the focus on factors, for me as a hiring manager, I try to say, okay, if we don't have a lot of applicants that are qualified, like change your recruiting tactics, look in different places, open up to different schools, because oftentimes companies will focus on the Ivy League or the schools that they have relationships with, and then you're surprised that they have a narrow group of individuals or a narrow diversity of thought, and they don't have a lot of candidates. Well, open it up. One of the examples we talked about in a recent podcast was in Germany, how one of the companies there has an entire department focused on working with autistic people doing code reviews, because they love going down in that code and figuring out like, why isn't it working? And they could be there for 8 hours figuring out one problem and they don't care because they love it. That's what, but until you think outside the box, you can't invite those types of individuals into your organization.
Yeah. And, speaking from someone, I was at a career fair yesterday, and I think I happened upon some people who seemed like, and I'm no expert in this, but seemed like they were on the autism spectrum. But and you could tell that this person was potentially trying to process information, and they weren't as, I guess, interview savvy as some of the others. So being able to just to sit there and have an open mind and say, okay, you may think that this person who's taking a long time to respond to you is, did they hear me correctly or whatever? Or is it that this person could potentially have a disability that we're not aware of? I think just having an open mind in general, helps with so many different things. I also don't want to forget, I mean, Kirsten and Chris have been talking about, and I want to jump into talking about actually the experiences at conferences overall. But one of the things that I have seen and have heard from, across the board is from an age perspective too. So, you have all these other different, all the different isms, sexism, racism, all these different things where people have their prejudices, and it tends to, I see it in the age space as well. So just again, being allies for each other, like just because a person is, quote, has 25 years of experience doesn't mean that they're, quote unquote, overqualified for a position. Just like the junior person who has 2 years of experience, you gotta just try to, if a person is interested and they're excited about the role, give them that shot, and not make assumptions about what they can or cannot do overall as a whole. Ron says, Chris, any tips for social engineering your next boss?
Well, I think where he's trying to go with that is make that connection, like Kristen was talking about, with the person that you're talking to. So meet them at a conference, follow them on social networks, point out the things that you're doing that you admire, that you like, to build that relationship with them, so that when you are in that hiring conversation, they already have that relationship in the back of their mind, or they've had that experience with you. That doesn't always help, but it's just part of that relationship building. And if you know what they like, you can tailor your responses to that angle to possibly help in their decision making.
Yeah. I've also heard, I have had situations where a manager they are trying to do the right thing, right? And they say, oh, I'm only looking for, I would prefer a woman. I would prefer, I have a really diverse team. I have a white guy and a black woman, and I have this and that, and I'm looking for an Asian person, like, and they're trying to, in their minds, put together this team of people that is, quote, a diverse team. But that in and of itself is like, it just targeting saying I want this or that in and of itself is a challenge. And the HR professionals in the world and the team, out here in the industry, we try our best to say to folks, hey, we know you're looking to do the right thing, but it's really about whoever is like the most qualified candidate, and not necessarily one versus the other. I want you guys to talk about the conferences and conference experiences overall. What that's like, what you've seen. Kirsten, you had some great notes about just the different experiences. I know Deidre Diamond, who started Cybersecurity, she started her nonprofit, based on, I believe it was based on what she saw at conferences in the past. So any points you want to make around conferences overall in the experience?
Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, it's a little bit low, but we hear you.
A call came in. Just for those of you that don't know, it took us a while to get the sound working, and I had to move from a computer to a phone. So then the headphones cut off. All right. So I can only offer you my personal experience, obviously. And another thing that happened recently at a conference that got Chris and I talking was I was observing someone brand new to the field, brand new to our industry, and brand new to the conference scene. And she's young and she's female. And I was watching, and that's relevant to this, how she was treated and how she handled it. And I'm going to say, it was a flashback for me. It brought back memories. The more you get known in the community, the less you have to deal with the kind of crap that she was having to deal with. But there were people approaching her and speaking down to her and saying things to her like, she'd say, "Hi, welcome to our table," and the people would say, "Well, I see you've got some interesting things going on here. You're demoing this, and you've got a CTF here. Who can I talk to that can help me? Who can I talk to that can explain it to me? Who can I talk to that can tell me more?" They just wrote her off right off the bat as being someone incapable of speaking about the CTF and of speaking about the demo that was occurring. And she actually knew more about it at that moment than anybody else that was standing there. And she handled it very well. She's maybe too young to be as kind of bitter and jaded about it as I am, but I'm sick of it. I'm so sick of it. And 2020 or whatever time it is, like I'm tired of it. Why did she have to even go through that? But she did. And so that was something where I would be looking in that moment for, or I can remember in the past when somebody would come over to me, I'm at the table for my employer, and they'd say, "Well, who's technical here? Who can talk to me?" What I love more than anything is when a woman responds with a technical answer, because they get it, because they're the one who wrote the code, or they're the ones who set up the product. But because that's statistically not typically the case, people don't even give them a chance.
And that's something we also have to change in our culture, the culture of boot babes and things like that. Like, don't have solely female representation for marketing or bringing someone in front of your boots, because then you set that expectation that's all that they're there for. And I know it's been changing recently, and there's been pushback from individuals within the field like that. That's not acceptable anymore. We've evolved from that time and place. But if you go back in time, it was females that took the space shuttle to the moon. They were the computer scientists in the back, crunching all the numbers, helping to change the guidance systems, to do all the updates. They were the original computers. They were the people that computed the math to get it done. And somehow along the way it got changed, but we have to realize that everyone's good at it, and by having certain roles dedicated to a certain gender, that just affects the industry as a whole. So we have to get away from that.
So a couple good comments here. Dale Drew says, don't use LinkedIn. Don't forget to use LinkedIn career advice features. You can be linked to professionals in your space and in your area to help guide you through techniques to break into a specific industry. Jeffrey White wants to talk about applicant tracking systems. Where can we add more personal value in physically reviewing resumes for potential talent or a possible good fit for a position? We'll get back to that applicant tracking systems in a second, Jeffrey White. Dr. Jan Boutron, she is starting a study on implicit bias and explicit bias in cybersecurity. She wants to know who would like to take her survey. Contact her on LinkedIn. George Sprague says, when I worked at Atos, I always did a test if I met if I met someone who was technical, and one of the women in our team was always the one with the answer. So I made sure that she became the lead. Oh, and Elizabeth is talking about your more recent conference experience, where she said that situation is quite familiar with me, not just on conferences, but also on regular communication with people hitting the question, so who can we speak to regarding the technical part? So I will take on applicant tracking system. The easy stuff.
Before you get to the applicant tracking system, because I'm interested in your answer on that.
Yeah.
Chris just happens to work at a company where it's very diverse, and in particular, there's some really brilliant women working there. Can you speak to, please tell me you have had the opportunity to, because your company's also very active in the community. You guys are everywhere, or you all are everywhere. And tell me about some experiences with, maybe lawyer Liz or one of your other brilliant females where somebody maybe made an assumption about them not being technical because they
Yeah,
kicked their ass technical.
I would say one of my
If you
first
have that.
experiences with that is that before I even joined the company, I was brought on for a contractor role, and in one of the calls with our clients, they assumed that because a female was leading the PM role of that project, that they weren't technical, and she was able to talk through that and outshine them. And very quickly the customer realized that yes, they're not just leading the call, but they have that technical expertise. And then one thing I want to touch on in regards to hiring, it's about passion. So you look for individuals with that passion, with that curiosity, no matter who they are, and that's how you build your team. Because that's just a way to look at it. Yeah, that's the easiest way to answer that question.
Kirsten, everybody wants to connect with you, Tyrone in particular. So I'm going to make sure I tag you. Applicant tracking systems. So very quickly, applicant tracking systems, especially when there's a couple different reasons why they're in use. We have what's called OFCCP compliance. We have to be able to hold on to all the resumes and see who is going through the pipeline, who's applying, all that good stuff. So some of the things that happens, and you guys might not even know this, but even on LinkedIn, there is a ranking system with some of these applicant tracking systems where the more your resume matches the job, the higher you're going to get ranked. So, for example, if I am using LinkedIn, for example, and LinkedIn is not an ATS, but if I'm using LinkedIn Recruiter and I get 100 applicants to a role, and you're awesome, but your resume is not aligned to the position, and you're number 75 and 10 other people's resumes really, really aligned to that position, they unfortunately, even if they are not the right fit, will get the first call. Well, it's just the nature of just not having enough time in a day to go through every single resume. Now, from a management perspective, we've spoken to a lot of leaders who will say they will want to see every single resume because there's things in the resumes that they've seen that they get excited about that a recruiter might not necessarily know that they're looking for. So, if, for example, I'm a new recruiter and I don't know anything about SANS, for example, and a hiring manager sees that a person has taken a SANS course, but and this particular SANS course is important to him or her, and the rest of the resume does not say that, they may say, oh, I want to see this person because I know this person took the SANS course, got this SANS certification, so they might know, they know more than potentially these other people. So applicant tracking systems are tricky. It's just the way it is, especially in bigger organizations. You can't get around them. I would say, think about Chris with hacking the system. Like some of the things Chris and Ron talked about in the last week's podcast was, if you see a job that you're interested in, reaching directly out to the hiring manager, making them aware, showing that passion, hitting up people on LinkedIn, doing research about the positions and the jobs and the roles, and to you're fighting a losing battle trying to get over applicant tracking systems. So that's not a fight you want to.
1,000,000%. 1,000,000%. If you don't remember anything we say today, applying for the job is not enough. And then complaining on Twitter that you applied and never heard anything is also not enough.
Yeah.
There's a very high percentage chance that no one's ever going to see your application. You're not even going to show up in the searches. Oftentimes, depending on the formatting, most applicant tracking systems, they suck. There's some old SAP system or something. They're awful. Some of them aren't that bad, but most of them do suck. If every recruiter listening raises their hand if you've used some version of Taleo at some point in your life, thankfully we don't anymore, but fucking sucks, right?
Any of them.
We're not going to see your resume. So I tell people, after you apply, the first thing you need to do is go to LinkedIn or Indeed or Glassdoor. They're all free. You don't have to pay for them. As a candidate, you're going to go in there and you're going to figure out who recruits there and who the hiring managers are there. I would ask that you start with the recruiter, give them a chance first, and then your second step would be the manager. Go in there and say, hey, hi, so-and-so. I just wanted to bring to your attention that I applied for rec number XYZ. Looking forward to what the next steps are. And then give them a day or two. They're probably going to see your direct message. Recruiters are really good about seeing their direct messages. Me on Twitter, everybody else on LinkedIn.
The other thing that I would add about applicant tracking systems is remember who designed those systems. There's that implicit and explicit bias in the algorithms that do these searches. And then there's also the other end of those using the applicant tracking system. If you're not using the right keywords, if you're choosing to focus on strong action words versus soft skills, you're going to remove an entire set of the population because you're focused on a male characteristic within that job description, and you'll automatically filter out a female candidate that might not have described their experience in that same way. So that's definitely one of the reasons that it's not enough, is because A, the job description, B, the query terms, and then C, resume, like all three of those combined together is just a recipe for disaster when it comes to searching.
Yep. And to Renee's point earlier, that ties into what you just said, from OFCCP compliance and any other federally mandated compliance, really you can't use those words. We can't search for anything that we can't measure. And so strength is not a tangible thing that we can measure, right? We can measure things that you can count and you can add. So, and also statistically speaking, not to make it a girl thing again, women are less likely to apply to a position that asks for a specific requirement.
That's true.
I don't fit into that mold. I've never been qualified for the job I've ever had, but typically a woman isn't going to apply if it says you have to have these things. So most of the time I'm finding that things that are in the requirements should really technically be down in the preferred area. Mm-hmm. And you run out of things to say, but if it says Python, but some other scripting language, then guess what? We'll go back to the willingness and ability. Probably you're willing, and more than likely you're able to figure out some other scripting language. So
I think one of the tweets that I love when it comes to that is have the confidence of a 20-year-old white guy when you're applying to these job descriptions. If you only meet like 2 of the requirements, but you have a passion for it, just go ahead and apply, because if you magically get selected through the applicant tracking system, through the recruiter, now you have your chance to shine, right? So just go ahead and apply, because you'll miss any shots that you don't take.
Chris, you and I talked 1 or 2 B-sides charms ago. I think that's what it was. It was definitely a B-sides. So I don't remember which one. And it was me probably submitting my first talk or something like that. It was a while ago. And we were trying to think of what to call it. The phone's ringing again. And we talked about, hacking the system, hacking it, right? Like, what can we do? And this is what you can do. Don't just go through the applicant tracking process. Don't just apply for the job. Do what you were talking about. Find out, this is what I'm going to do. Where do you work? Who else works there? What are they doing on social? What are they doing in the community? Are they talking at any conferences? Or what conversations are they having, particularly on Twitter? How can I participate in those? How can I build a relationship with those people? Right? That's you genuinely building relationships. It is time consuming. However, that is how your resume is going to get seen.
A referral. Yeah.
We talk about that probably like every week. So a couple different points here, tons of great conversation. So Dr. Jan says, again, analytics in LinkedIn have improved greatly for recruiters who can afford to pay for the extra analytics. Chris Wolski has said, I was fortunate enough to have several women to work with. I had no problem taking lessons from them. I don't know everything. That's right, Chris Wolski. Michael McPherson said, Chris Wolski totally agreed. The leadership stigma is rife across the industry, and this is a fundamental problem to not only diverse teams, but also the apparent skills gap. Tyrone Ron Werner says, Kirsten, can we quote you? Most applicant tracking systems suck. I don't know if we both said that. You could quote us both.
K. Renner.
As a candidate, I agree too.
Most recruiters are going to agree with you as well.
Exactly. Tyrone says, Dr. Jan, primitive thinking and acting men are still prevalent in our society. Unfortunately, Ron says, not just men, Tyrone, people. It's why gaining many perspectives is key. I 100% agree. So, there's just so many comments here that also remember the females apply for a job which they fit at 85 to 90%. Males apply when they fit at a lower percentage, just to the point you just made, Kirsten. Jeff thanks us for addressing the ATS questions. Kirsten says, I'll also say it helps to look into companies that may be smaller or if relocatable in cities that are less competitive, in addition to search out non-tech companies, because every company has technical departments, even if it's retail, hospitality, insurance, financial services, etc. Awesome point, Kirsten Beckwith. So she's absolutely right. There is so much to talk about. We're at 52 minutes in this discussion. We typically end in 30 minutes. There's so many pieces to this puzzle. I want to say a final thought or two, but my big passion right now is really focusing on the youth. And I think we had some conversations a couple weeks ago around Chris going and talking to his son's kindergarten class and all the girls asking questions. I think Chris Wolski and I talked about, young people and how we all have these passions. Chris, which podcast? Who did we have on a podcast? And this woman's awesome, has a PhD in math. She was on like a week ago, and we both talked about how we had this love of math as young girls, like 8, 9, 10 years old. And I gave my story about having this teacher who saw that aptitude and immediately said, boom, you're going to be in after school math, and had us all in there as little kids. And we were 12, 13 in the 7th and 8th grade doing math problems out of the SAT book, had no idea. He would just snatch a problem out, throw it up on the board. And we would do it because kids rise to expectations, right? And if you have the aptitude, you get that done. So focusing on bringing in a new, going across the board, girls, boys, all, diversities, into disenfranchised communities where there's so much talent out there. that just needs to be developed and found. There's kids, across the board. And my goal is to just work with more and more young people to get them interested and focused, so that we're not having this conversation 20 years from now about the lack of talent, the lack of diversity, and all that stuff. Excuse me, because if we start now to foster that, I think we will just automatically just raise up and have this great diverse group of talented individuals like we have in a ton of industries that in the past, surgeons, accountants, I was reading something about women going into accounting 30 years ago or so. They had like a challenge. This is not a new thing. It's happened in other industries in the past. So how can we look back, use some of that history, and kind of like move things forward? So that's my point. Kirsten. Oh, Chris, you usually ask an awesome question at the
No,
end.
no, I'll let Kirsten give her couple of thoughts, and then I want to give something just at the end. So.
Okay, awesome.
I love how like-minded we all are. Even some of the feedback that you were reading to us, we are all on the same page. We are all on the same team, and we are all
Kirsten, can you
able
speak up?
Oh, sure. Trying to get closer now that the headphones didn't work. Be responsible for your behavior. Be responsible for your relationships. Be responsible for being accountable to how am I contributing to this thing, good or bad, and how can I improve myself. It seems really like a basic thing to say, but it matters. It's going to matter as you build those relationships and strengthen those relationships. It's going to help everyone in the community. And I'll go back to really trying to identify and training your managers also to identify, as you're working on those relationships, who's willing and able, who's capable, and how we can provide opportunities for as many of those people as possible. That will just naturally make a more diverse and welcoming community.
And then for me, I wanted to touch on two topics. One is pipelines, and then the other one is bringing more people in. So for the pipeline conversation, yes, I think having cybersecurity as a topic of discussion earlier on, middle school, elementary school, so that people are aware of the risks that you're walking into, and the more aware of the risks and the people that help defend them on a day-to-day basis, the more interested they will be in that as a possible profession later in their life. If they don't know of everyone helping in the background to keep them secure online or in their Minecraft game or whatever, they won't know that they want to be that. And then when it comes to bringing more people in right now, it's encouraging different people to go to the conferences, to go to the B-sides, to provide opportunities like Diana Initiative or sponsorships to expensive conferences that individuals might not be able to afford or to travel to, and providing them with those opportunities. That's the way that we can bring in more people, because some of these conferences are really expensive, and by not being able to go to it, you can't bring in those types of people. So those are the things that I would strive for organizations and individuals to help promote the industry to bring in more diverse people.
Just
Awesome.
one quick tip for people who are interested in attending conferences, but they can't do it financially. Volunteer. Start at B-sides. Become a volunteer. And when you give of your time, the community gives back to you too. So it's a really good way if you're trying to break into conferences, if you're trying to find a way to get in. Start by volunteering.
Hack your way into it.
Hack your way in.
Something like that.
Great point. Great points. Okay, so folks, it is almost 1 hour. Wow. Kirsten, thank you so much for coming on with us. Chris, thank you for being an awesome co-host and bringing in all these amazing people.
I think we lost her.
All right. If you want to connect, I'm on LinkedIn. I don't know if I'm tagged on here, but I'm K Renner on Twitter. And thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you, everyone. Yep. I'll just wait here until Renee comes back to close out the recording. But I want to thank everyone that's been listening so far and commenting so far. This is an important issue to the community as a whole, as well as myself. As Renee and Kristen mentioned, this started out of a conversation with Kirsten and myself, and we need to promote allyism and supporting each other in this community. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.